She tried to have me arrested for standing on my own lawn. She thought a clipboard and a bad attitude made her queen of the cul-de-sac. She didn't know my brother is the sheriff, and she really didn't see what was coming next. This isn't just a story about an out-of-control HOA Kerren. It's about justice, it's about standing up when no one else will. And it's about what happens when you push the wrong person too far, so grab your headphones, hit that like button, subscribe if you love a good revenge story, because this one ends with public humiliation, legal consequences, and the sweetest taste of karma you've ever seen. The sun was cruel that Saturday afternoon as it beat down on the tops of the tidy row of houses in our suburban cul-de-sac. I was kneeling in the front yard, sweat already pooling at the small of my back, soil clinging to my gloves. Each hydrangea I planted was like setting down a piece of her memory. My mom had loved these flowers. She used to say they looked like bouquets made by clouds. I wanted this space to feel like home again. Like her, I had just patted the last mound of earth when I heard the sharp click of heels on concrete. A shadow fell across my shoulder. I looked up, squinting against the glare. She stood there, arms crossed, lips pursed, clipboard in hand. A visor shaded her cold blue eyes. "That doesn't comply with HOA Code Section 3, Subsection B," she said. I blinked, trying to stand, brushing the dirt from my knees. "I'm sorry," I said. "These are hydrangeas for my mom. She passed away last spring. This is my first Mother's Day without her." She tilted her head in mock sympathy. "Rules are rules," she said. "Sentiment doesn't change landscaping guidelines." I looked at the flower bed, then back at her. "They're not obstructing the sidewalk, they're well within the line," I said quietly. She flipped a page on her clipboard with exaggerated flair, improper flora and unauthorized garden installations. She read aloud, "This community maintains a visual standard for the benefit of all homeowners, and your little tribute is in direct violation." My chest tightened. I tried again. "It's a garden bed. I didn't paint the house neon. She cut me off with a sharp laugh. People always think the rules don't apply to you," she snapped. "You moved in last year and already think you can do whatever you want." "You people," I repeated coldly. She looked away, feigning innocence. "I'm just doing my job," she said. "Now you have 72 hours to remove those plants or face daily fines." With that, she snapped a photo of my yard with her phone and strutted back toward her golf cart parked arrogantly across my driveway. I watched her go, the smell of freshly turned soil mingling with the bitter taste of helplessness in my mouth. Her name was Kerren, of course, president of the Homeowners Association and self-appointed enforcer of all things petty. Every community had one, but ours had the queen. She wore her power like a crown and wielded her clipboard like a sword. I'd seen her harass neighbors for leaving trash bins out too long for parking, too close to the curb for letting kids chalk on the sidewalk. I thought maybe she'd leave me alone. I kept to myself, paid my dues, mowed my lawn. But something about me must have irked her. Maybe it was the tattoo on my arm. Maybe it was the fact that I ignored her at the last board meeting. Or maybe it was just that I didn't cower. That night I sat on the porch, sipping tea as the sun dipped behind the rooftops. I stared at the hydrangeas. They were small and fragile, but they stood anyway. The next morning the citation was on my door, bright orange and taped crooked like a slap in the face. My dog barked at it as if even he knew it was nonsense. I called the HOA office and left a message. No response. I sent an email. Auto reply. By the third day I hadn't touched the flowers. They bloomed defiantly under the sun. When I stepped outside that afternoon, found her again. Kerren standing, arms crossed beside two other board members like she was leading a firing squad. "Your 72 hours are up," she announced. "Remove the flowers now or we will." One of the men behind her looked uncomfortable. He shifted from foot to foot. The other stared at the ground. I met her gaze. "Touch them and I'll report you for vandalism," I said evenly. "These are on my private property within regulation distance from the curb and not obstructing any pathway. You'll report me," she scoffed. "To whom exactly?" I felt the heat rise behind my eyes but kept my voice calm. "I have documentation, photos, timestamps, HOA rules printed and highlighted." Kerren smiled, a slow, cruel smile. "I look forward to your email," she said. She turned and walked away, her minions trailing like shadows. I exhaled slowly. Fists clenched. I wasn't going to let her win. Not this time. Not over flowers. Not over my mother. That night I double-checked the bylaws. I had been right. There was nothing in the HOA documents that specifically banned flower beds within the permitted zone. It was subjective. Kerren's subjective wrath. Then the letter came, typed in bold notice of violation. $250 fine. Non-compliance would result in further penalties and potential legal action. I stared at the paper. My hands trembled, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was fury. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to plead. I was going to fight her. But I had to be smarter, because Kerren wasn't just a neighbor. She was a tyrant in pearls. And I knew she wouldn't stop until she had me under her thumb or out of the neighborhood. I closed the door, locked it, and began to make a plan. But what I didn't know, what Kerren couldn't have known, was that her biggest mistake wasn't the fine or the threats. It was calling the police on me 3 days later, because when they showed up, so did someone else. And he wasn't just a cop. He was my brother, and he was the sheriff. Let me know when you're ready for section 2. The morning sun filtered through the blinds as I stood in the kitchen, staring at the violation letter still stuck to the fridge. The ink had smudged slightly where my fingers had clutched it too hard the night I got it. Each word on the page felt like a slap, a sneer dressed in bureaucracy. I took a sip of coffee and stared out the window where the hydrangeas stood proud like soft explosions of blue and pink. They looked so harmless, so peaceful. And yet they had sparked a war. Kerren hadn't stopped there. The next week brought more citations. One for a garden gnome I'd placed near the porch, one for the wind chime my aunt had sent from Oregon, and another for an excessively decorated front yard. The wind chime was a string of ceramic stars that barely made a sound. The gnome was maybe 6 inches tall and wearing a tiny fishing hat. None of it mattered. She was after control. I had defied her. Now she wanted to make an example out of me. I avoided her when I could. But she made it her business to show up at the worst moments. When I was unloading groceries, she appeared beside the driveway making notes on her clipboard. When I took my dog for a walk, she followed us with her golf cart at a crawling pace. Her stare was clinical, like she was inspecting a problem that needed removal. I tried the high road. I emailed the HOA board again. I included photos and clear references to the community rules. I even offered to present my case at the next meeting. No one replied. Days passed. Then a neighbor whispered to me in passing that Kerren had referred to me as hostile and disruptive, that I had lashed out during an earlier meeting. I had never raised my voice, never even attended that meeting. It became clear then. This wasn't about rules. This was personal. The final straw came the day I found my flower bed destroyed. I came home from work and stopped cold at the sight of it. The hydrangeas were ripped out, roots and all scattered across the lawn like torn, and paper dirt was smeared across the sidewalk, and the decorative border stones had been tossed aside. I dropped to my knees, heart pounding. I reached for one of the flowers, cradling it like something wounded. My hands trembled. I could smell the crushed petals. I could feel the betrayal in my bones. A voice called out from across the street. Mr. Sandoval, my neighbor. He said he'd seen someone messing around the yard earlier. A blonde woman with a clipboard. He hadn't wanted to interfere, but now he looked regretful. I thanked him and went inside. I didn't cry. I was too angry, too tired. I took photos of the damage, documented everything. Then I did something I never thought I'd do. I walked straight to Kerren's door and rang the bell. "You," answered with a smirk already in place as if she'd been waiting. I held up my phone. "You destroyed my flower bed," I said flatly. She blinked slowly. "Prove it," she said. "Maybe a wild animal got into it." I stared at her. "You're sick. And you're trespassing," she said. "Should I call the police?" "Go ahead," I said. Her eyebrows lifted at that, but she didn't back down. "You think you're brave, but people like you always learn eventually," she said. "Rules are meant to be followed. And bullies are meant to be stopped, I replied. She shut the door in my face. I walked home, heart pounding, palms sweating. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't expect the knock on my door 2 nights later. It was nearly 10. I was in pajamas drinking tea, trying to unwind. The dog barked sharply at the sudden noise. When I opened the door, 2 officers stood there. One was tall and serious. The other looked barely out of academy. "Ma'am," the older one said, "we received a report about a disturbance involving threats made against a neighbor." I froze. Kerren had really done it. She'd filed a false report. She'd told them I'd threatened her. I looked at the officer and said, "That's a lie. I never touched her, never even raised my voice." He didn't look convinced. "Do you mind if we come inside and ask you a few questions?" Before I could respond, headlights swept across the driveway. Another car pulled in fast and parked. I recognized it immediately. Black SUV with the county sheriff's seal on the side. The door opened and he stepped out, broad-shouldered and uniform, eyes scanning the scene with a practiced calm. "Everything all right here?" he asked. The officers straightened. "Responding to a call, sir, potential threat complaint from a neighbor." He nodded once, then looked at me. His eyes softened. "Hi, sis," he said. The officers turned to stare. "Wait, you're her brother?" one of them asked. "Yes," he said. "She's my sister, and I think someone's playing games here." He walked over and gently took me by the elbow. "You okay?" he asked quietly. I nodded. He looked at the officers again. "Mind giving us a minute?" They hesitated, then stepped back. He led me inside. I shut the door and leaned against it. "I didn't threaten her," I said. "I know," he replied. "She's already filed 2 complaints with the department over the last year against other neighbors, all dismissed as baseless." I blinked. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Didn't know it was her until tonight," he said. "Didn't know it was you until I heard your name on the dispatch." I swallowed hard. "What do I do?" "You gather evidence," he said. "You play it smart and clean and calm. And then," he smiled, "then we take her down the right way." I looked out the window where the remains of my flowers still lay in the dirt. Something new stirred in my chest, not grief, not fear. Resolve. "Let me know when you're ready for Section 3. The next morning the world felt sharper. Light poured across the lawn, catching the empty space where my flowers had been. I stood on the porch, coffee in hand, thinking not about loss, but about strategy. This was no longer about plants or citations. This was about standing my ground. I called my brother just after 9. He picked up on the first ring. "Ready to start?" I asked. "Already made a few calls." He said, "Kerren's got quite a reputation with the local officers, and not in a good way. We met that afternoon at the county office." He walked me through filing a formal complaint for harassment and vandalism. We attached photos, documentation, my neighbor's statement, and a detailed timeline. He explained that the HOA had legal limits, and that Kerren had overstepped every single one. "She wants power," he said. "People like her rely on fear and silence, so we're going to shine a very bright light." I spent the next week gathering more. I spoke to neighbors one by one. Some were hesitant at first, but when I shared my story, they opened up. Mrs. Kaplan next door had been fined 3 times for her American flag wreath. The Chens had gotten warnings about their birdbath. A single dad at the end of the street got reported for letting his daughter draw chalk hearts on the driveway. I documented every story I made, copies of their letters. Some even let me take photos of their citations. Kerren had turned the HOA into her personal playground. It wasn't enforcement, it was targeted. Bullying. One night I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by folders and notes. My brother leaned over the pile. "You've got enough to bring this to the board and the press if it comes to that," he said. "She wants a spotlight, give it to her." He suggested something better. The HOA's next quarterly meeting was open to residents. He would be there, not in uniform, but present, watching. I marked the date on the calendar and read. Then I made copies of a flyer. Nothing dramatic. Just a clean, single-page listing. What residents could do if they felt harassed by their HOA. Contact info, county complaint forms. A breakdown of their legal rights. I slipped them discreetly into mailboxes, left a few at the coffee shop near the community entrance. By the day of the meeting, half the neighborhood had seen one. Kerren must have felt it coming. 2 days before the meeting, she showed up at my door again. She didn't smile this time. Her face was tight, jaw clenched, eyes sharp. "You're spreading lies," she hissed. "You're going to regret this." I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. "I'm spreading the truth," I said, "and the only person who should be worried is you." She leaned closer. "Do you think people are going to side with you over me?" she asked. "They know who I am. They're about to find out who you really are," I said. Her lips parted like she wanted to scream. Instead, she turned and stalked off. Her heels dug tiny divots in the grass as she walked straight through my yard again. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing the destroyed flowers, hearing her voice, remembering the way the officers had looked at me that first night, like maybe I was the problem. I wasn't. And tomorrow I'd prove it. The HOA meeting was held in the community hall. Rows of folding chairs had been set up under buzzing fluorescent lights. The air smelled like dry carpet and burned coffee. I arrived early. My brother sat quietly in the back wearing jeans and a baseball cap. He nodded once as I passed. Kerren stood at the front by the podium, clipboard in hand, voice sharp and practiced. She welcomed everyone with a smile that didn't touch her eyes, introduced the other board members, thanked people for attending. Then she opened the floor for resident concerns. I stood slowly. My hands were steady. "My name is Emma, and I'd like to speak about a pattern of harassment by the HOA board president." A few heads turned. Kerren's smile froze. "This is not the appropriate forum for personal grievances," she said quickly. "It's the only forum you haven't blocked me from," I replied. And then I pulled out my file. I began to speak. Clearly, calmly, I laid out every citation, every photo, every complaint. I named the neighbors who had agreed to share their stories. I passed out copies of documentation. Kerren tried to interrupt twice. Each time the room grew colder, someone whispered, "Let her finish." Another person said, "I got fined for a wreath too." By the time I was done, the silence was thick and electric. Kerren's face had gone pale. One of the board members cleared his throat. "I wasn't aware of half of this," he said. "Kerren, did you approve all these fines yourself?" She stammered. "Something about authority, discretion, community standards." My brother stood, then spoke from the back, identified himself, mentioned the official report now filed with the county, reminded everyone that selective enforcement could be considered abuse of power. Kerren's mouth opened, then shut, then opened again. No words came out. Another board member said, maybe it was time to review her role. Someone clapped, then more joined. The meeting didn't end with her being dragged out. It ended with a vote, a motion to suspend her from her duties, pending review, a call for transparency, a request for change. As I walked out into the night, cool air filled my lungs like new life. My brother joined me, hands in pockets. "You did it," he said. "She's not finished." I replied, "Maybe not." He said, "But neither are you." I looked back at the building where the light still glowed, where the neighbors were still talking, and I smiled. The war wasn't over, but the tide had turned. Kerren didn't vanish quietly. She clung to whatever scraps of power she had left, sending emails, signing off with HOA president, even after her suspension. She claimed bias, accused the board of betrayal, threatened lawsuits. But the neighborhood wasn't listening anymore. Word spread fast after the meeting. Neighbors started talking to each other in driveways, at the mailbox at the community park. Stories poured out like floodwater after a broken dam. A family that had nearly moved because of her. An elderly woman who cried when her rose arbor was torn down. The illusion was gone. They saw her now not as a leader but a tyrant. The interim board held a follow-up meeting, and this time the hall was full. Kerren arrived late. She took a seat near the back and tried to speak, but the board president firmly reminded her she was no longer in a position to lead. When she stood and walked out, no one followed. Meanwhile, the county began its own investigation. My brother helped facilitate it quietly. I continued documenting every communication she sent one last violation notice. A laughable attempt to cite me for having too many solar lights along my walkway. I scanned it and added it to the pile. It wasn't about revenge. It was about truth and consequence. Then the tipping point came. A neighbor named Liam shared a security video from his doorbell cam. It showed Kerren sneaking onto his porch and removing a flag he had placed there for his son who served overseas. She looked around stuffed, the flag into her tote bag, and walked off as if she had every right. That video was shared at the next HOA forum. No one spoke. No one needed to. She was finished. But it didn't stop there. A week later. My doorbell rang just after sunset. I opened it, expecting a delivery. Instead, I found Kerren standing there, arms folded, jaw tight, eyes glassy. "You happy now?" she said, voice low. "You humiliated me, turned everyone against me for what flowers?" I stepped outside and shut the door behind me. "You did." "That to yourself," I said. "You used the HOA to bully people and it finally caught up with you." "I protected this neighborhood," she snapped, "from people like you who don't respect rules. You destroyed property, filed a false police report, and harassed families." I said, "You didn't protect anything, you just wanted control." She stepped closer, her voice almost a whisper. "Do you think you've won?" "I don't need to win," I said. "I just need to make sure people like you don't get to hurt anyone else." Her hands curled into fists, but she said nothing. Then the porch lights from across the street flicked on. My neighbor, Mr. Sandoval, stepped out, holding a phone raised. "You should leave," he said simply. Kerren turned and walked away. Not a word, not a glance back. 2 days later, I got a call from the sheriff's office. They had completed their investigation. Between the video footage, the violation patterns, and the harassment complaints, Kerren was being formally charged with property damage and filing a false police report. She would be issued a restraining order and barred from holding any position of authority within any HOA in the state for 5 years. I hung up and stared at the phone. Relief settled over me. Not like fireworks, but like gentle rain washing everything clean. That weekend I replanted my flower bed. Same hydrangeas, same stones, but this time I added a little sign. It read, "Welcome to the neighborhood." Several neighbors stopped by as I worked, bringing small plants cuttings, even snacks. It became something more than a garden. It became a symbol. A week later, a meme started floating around our neighborhood Facebook page. A still image of Kerren holding the confiscated flag from Liam's porch, captioned with "HOA stands for harass our area." It went viral locally. Even someone from the county office commented with a single popcorn emoji. It was petty. It was hilarious. It was justice. My brother dropped by that evening wearing his uniform. He stood at the edge of the flower bed and nodded once. "You did good," he said. "So did you." I replied, "You believed me when no one else did. You had the truth." He said, "That's all you need if you're brave enough to stand behind it." We sat on the porch as the sun went down. The wind chime tinkled softly in the breeze. It was still there. Still legal. Still mine. The dog curled at my feet. I watched the last light fade and thought about how quickly things can change. How power built on fear is always temporary. Kerren thought she owned this place. She thought fear was enough, but she forgot one thing. You don't mess with family. Especially not when your brother is the sheriff, and you definitely don't try to bury someone who knows how to rise. Because sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one writing the final chapter.